Hannah Brooks stood on the sidewalk outside Orsini's for 11 minutes before she convinced herself to open the door. She had counted the minutes. She knew, because she had a habit of counting things, she could not control the steps between the bus stop and her apartment, the seconds between thunderclaps, the dollars left in her checking account after every bill had been paid. Counting made the shapeless dread feel smaller, more manageable. It gave her the illusion of mastery over a life that had never quite bent to her wishes. The rain fell the way Seattle rain always did in November. Not in sheets, not dramatically, but in that patient, persistent mist that didn't so much fall as hover, settling on her coat and hair and the backs of her hands like a quiet accusation, the kind of rain that didn't announce itself, the kind that soaked you through before you realized it was happening. Through the glass, she could see the warm amber glow of the restaurant, white tablecloths, tapered candles in slender silver holders, a sommelier moving between tables with practiced ease, a couple near the window laughing at something private, their wine glasses catching the light. She had looked up the menu online 3 times. The cheapest entree was $38. There was a pasta dish hand-rolled, the website said, with truffle cream and shaved pecorino for $42, a steak for $64. She had done the math while sitting on her break at the flower shop. Her second job, her fingers still faintly smelling of chrysanthemums and stem water. She made $14.20 an hour at the flower shop. She worked 3 shifts a week, which meant she brought home roughly $85 after taxes. Her other job, answering phones and scheduling appointments at a dental office on Westlake, paid a salary. But that salary had to cover rent, utilities, groceries, and the $120 she sent home to Portland every month for her younger brother, Caleb, who was 19 and studying at community college and working at a pizza restaurant and trying so hard it made her chest ache. After all of it, she had $47 left until Friday. She had almost canceled 3 times. The first time, she'd typed out the message and then deleted it. The second time, she'd held her phone for a full minute before putting it back in her bag. The third time, she'd actually pressed send and then immediately sent a second message saying she'd made a mistake, she was sorry, she was still coming. She didn't know why she kept not canceling. Maybe it was the way Michael Carter had asked her not with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to things going his way, but carefully, like the question mattered and the answer mattered, and he understood she might say no. They had met 3 weeks earlier at the street, Mark's community book drive, where she had been donating the last of her mother's paperback romances. And he had been organizing boxes with his daughter, riding on his back like a small, determined barnacle. She didn't know much about him. She knew his name. She knew he had a daughter named Sophie who was 6 years old and wore her hair in 2 uneven braids. She knew he had kind eyes and a stillness about him that felt earned rather than passive. She did not know how to tell him that she couldn't afford a $38 pasta dish. She pushed open the door. Michael Carter had arrived at Orsini's 15 minutes early, which was something he had not done for a date in approximately 3 years. Because the last date he had been on before tonight had been with his wife, Claire. Claire had died on a Tuesday in January, 31 months ago. Black ice on the Aurora Bridge. The other driver had walked away. The police officer who came to Michael's door had been young, barely older than a college student, and his hands had shaken while he removed his hat. Michael remembered the hat. He didn't know why. He remembered the hat, and the particular quality of the silence in the house after Sophie had fallen asleep that night, and the way the hospital had smelled, and not much else from the weeks immediately following. His therapist, Dr. Evelyn Marsh, called that a normal protective response. His mother called it a blessing. Michael called it the thing that had happened to him, and he tried not to assign it more meaning than it already had. He had learned to braid hair from a library book. Claire had always done Sophie's hair 2 French braids every school day, loose waves on weekends, and when she was gone, Michael had stood in the bathroom on a Saturday morning holding a brush and Sophie's patient, trusting face in the mirror, and understood with absolute clarity that he had to learn. He was better at it now. Not as good as Claire. But Sophie had stopped wincing. He had met Hannah at the book drive on a Saturday when Sophie had woken up at 5:30 demanding pancakes, and he'd made them, and then they'd both been restless and at loose ends, the way weekend mornings sometimes got without enough structure, and he'd seen the flyer on the community board at the grocery store. Sophie had wanted to come. She'd wanted to see where the books went. He'd noticed Hannah the way you noticed someone who wasn't trying to be noticed. She had been quiet. She moved efficiently, without wasted motion, stacking boxes with the focused competence of someone accustomed to getting things done without help. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and she had a smudge of something, ink, maybe, or dust on her left wrist that she didn't seem aware of. Sophie had walked up to her without preamble and asked if the books would go to children who didn't have any. Hannah had crouched down to Sophie's level and said yes. That was exactly right. And she had said it like it was the most important thing she'd heard all day. Michael had asked for her number 10 minutes later. He had not planned to. He was still, on some level, surprised that he had. Now he sat at a table for two near the window, turning his water glass slowly in his hands, and tried to remember how any of this was supposed to work. She saw him before he saw her. He was sitting with his shoulders slightly forward, turning his water glass in slow quarter rotations on the white tablecloth, and he looked like someone who had arrived early and was now quietly reckoning with that fact. He was wearing a dark sweater, and his hair was still slightly damp from the rain. And he looked up when the hostess led her over, and his expression shifted into something open and unguarded. "You made it," he said. "I did," she said. She sat down. She placed her hands in her lap so he wouldn't see them. The menus were large and cream-colored with the restaurant's name embossed in gold at the top. The hostess set one in front of her with practiced grace and disappeared. Hannah opened it. The numbers hit her like small physical blows. She absorbed them with the trained stillness of someone who had been blindsided by numbers before the electric bill that came in $60 over budget the month the heat broke, the car repair she'd had to put on a credit card she was still paying off, the rent increase her landlord had slipped under the door on a Thursday evening. She had a whole repertoire of stillness for moments like this, but her hands, in her lap, had curled slightly. Michael was talking. He was talking about Sophie, about something Sophie had said at school last week that had made him laugh while driving home. And normally she would have been listening. She was interested in Sophie. She found herself genuinely curious about this small person. She'd met only briefly, but the numbers on the menu were doing something to her concentration. She thought, "I have $47. She thought, an entree and a glass of water and a tip would take all of it. She thought, "I have never in my adult life told a man I couldn't afford something on a first date, and I am not sure I can do it now. And I am also not sure I can sit here and smile through a dinner that will empty my account and make the next week very difficult, because that is the kind of decision that has consequences." Michael paused. She realized he had asked her something. "Sorry," she said. She stopped. She looked at the menu. She looked at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. Not impatient, not confused. Something steadier than either. She set the menu down. "I have to tell you something," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. She had worked hard, over the years, at not letting her voice shake, and it's embarrassing to say on a first date, and I'm going to say it anyway. He nodded once. He didn't rush her. "I can't afford this," she said. "I looked up the menu before I came, and I can't. I have $47 until Friday, and I can't spend all of it here, and I should have said something earlier, but I didn't know how." She watched him. She had braced herself for the particular expression she had seen on other faces at moments of financial disclosure, the quick recalibration, the subtle shift in the eyes, the way people sometimes tried to hide their surprise and succeeded only in making it more visible. She had been on the receiving end of that look enough times to know its exact geometry. Michael looked at her the way he had looked at Sophie when Sophie had knocked a glass of orange juice off the kitchen counter and stood frozen, waiting to be in trouble. He looked at her like the only important thing was making sure she knew it was going to be okay. He folded the menu, not apologetically, not with any performance of casualness. He simply folded it and set it aside like a document that had served its purpose and was no longer needed. "I picked this place out of habit," he said. "Claire liked it. We came here for anniversaries. I didn't think about it until just now. I should have thought about it." He said it plainly, without self-flagellation, the way you admitted a mistake you'd already processed and filed. "There's a food truck on Pike," he said. "Sophie and I go there most Fridays. Best grilled cheese in the city. They have a bench outside with a heat lamp." She looked at him. "I'm serious," he said. "I would genuinely rather be there." She believed him. That was the strange thing, she believed him completely. They left the restaurant. Michael told the hostess there had been a change of plans and thanked her. And the hostess smiled with professional warmth. And then they were outside in the mist and the amber of the streetlights, and Hannah took one breath of cold November air and felt something loosen in her chest. The truck was called Murray's, operated by a man named Garrett who had forearms like a longshoreman and a genuine passion for sourdough. He recognized Michael immediately and called him by name and handed over 2 paper-wrapped sandwiches and 2 cups of tomato soup before Michael had finished ordering. The total was $14. They sat on the wooden bench under the heat lamp while the city moved around them. A group of college students passed, laughing. A man walked a greyhound who moved with improbable elegance over the wet pavement. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing a guitar badly and earnestly. The sandwich was extraordinary. She wasn't sure she had expected that, but it was the bread had that particular crackling resistance of good sourdough, and there were 3 kinds of cheese and something slightly caramelized that she suspected was onion. "Sophie calls this the important sandwich," Michael said, "as opposed to not important sandwiches. What makes a sandwich important?" I asked her that. She said it's when you think about it afterward. Hannah looked down at her sandwich. She thought she understood. The mist had thickened slightly, turning the streetlights into soft aureoles of gold. It should have been cold. It wasn't, particularly. She was aware of the precise distance between her shoulder and his, aware of the warmth from the heat lamp, aware that she felt, and this surprised her, comfortable. Not the performing ease you don't feel kind of comfortable. Actually comfortable. "Thank you for telling me," he said. "At the restaurant." That took something. She considered deflecting. She was practiced at deflecting. "It did," she said instead. The soup was getting cold, and neither of them moved to leave. She told him about her father first, because it was easier than the other things, or not easier, but older, more worn smooth by years of telling. The way a river stone becomes comfortable in the hand. Her father, Raymond Brooks, had worked at a printing plant in Portland for 19 years. He'd known every person on that floor by name and the names of their children. He had been laid off 3 months before she started high school, and the world had changed in a way she had not been prepared for. Not dramatically. That was the thing she always tried to explain when she talked about it. It hadn't been dramatic. It had been the gradual erosion of small things: the cable subscription canceled, then the family trip that didn't happen, then her mother picking up a second job at a hotel laundry, coming home after midnight with her hands red and her face gone hollow with exhaustion. Her father had applied for jobs with a focused desperation that he tried to hide from his children and didn't quite succeed. She had been 16. She had understood more than they knew. "I used to lie awake and do the math," she said. "Like if I could just figure out the numbers well enough, I could fix it." As if the problem was that nobody had added things up correctly. Did it help? No. But it gave me something to do with my hands. She watched him absorb this. He didn't say anything immediately, and she appreciated that he didn't rush to fill the silence with reassurance. "My wife died 31 months ago," he said. The directness of it surprised her. Not the fact she had gathered, from small things, that he was widowed, but the way he said it. Without softening, without the euphemisms people usually reached for. He told her about the bridge, about the young police officer, about standing in the hospital corridor at 2 a.m, trying to understand something that his brain kept refusing to parse. He told her about the first week afterward, which he remembered mostly as a sequence of practical tasks, the calls that had to be made, the people who had to be told, the arrangements that had to be arranged, and how grateful he had been, in retrospect, for the tasks. Because the tasks had given him a place to put the part of himself that was still functioning. Sophie was 3, he said. Old enough to know something had happened, not old enough to understand what. She kept asking when Mama was coming home for about 2 months. He said it steadily. She did not mistake steadiness for the absence of pain. "How did you answer?" I told her the truth, as much of it as a 3-year-old can hold. He looked at the rain on the pavement. "I'm still not sure I did it right. Dr. Marsh says there isn't a right." The heat lamp hummed faintly above them. Garrett was serving another customer and whistling something tuneless and cheerful. They didn't kiss. It would have felt false, too neat, too much like a resolution to something that wasn't resolved. Instead, when they finally stood to leave, he put his arm around her shoulders for a moment in the way of someone offering warmth rather than claiming proximity, and she leaned into it briefly, and then they walked separate ways to the bus stop and her car, respectively. She sat in her car for a few minutes before starting the engine, her hands on the wheel, not doing the math for once. The envelope was orange. She knew what orange envelopes meant. She had known since she was 17 and had watched her mother go pale at the sight of one on the kitchen counter. Orange envelopes from the property management company meant something had gone wrong in a way that required formal documentation. She opened it in the hallway of her building, still in her coat, her work bag on her shoulder, rain damp and tired. It was a Thursday in early December, 3 weeks after the dinner. After 2 more evenings with Michael, once at a dim sum place in the International District where the total had come to $11 each, once walking the waterfront in the cold with coffee from a cart, which had been his explicit suggestion, and she understood that he had been paying attention. The notice informed her that her rent payment for November had been received, but that the late fee from October, which she had disputed, in writing, because she had paid on time, and the management company's online portal had experienced a processing delay, had not been resolved, and that the outstanding balance of $214 must be paid within 10 days or proceedings would begin. She read it twice. Then she stood in the hallway and looked at the wall and tried to breathe normally. $214. Her account had 31 in it. She had a paycheck coming on Friday, $612 after taxes from the dental office, and she'd been planning to use most of it for December rent, and Caleb's tuition supplement and the electric bill that was always higher in winter. She sat down on the hallway floor, which was cold and smelled of industrial cleaner, and put the orange envelope on her knees and stared at it. She thought, "This is solvable." She had solved harder things. She also thought, "I am so tired." She pulled out her phone. She had a text from Michael, a photo of Sophie at dinner with a bean balanced on her nose, captioned, "She has been practicing." She put the phone back. She texted him. Something came up. "Can we reschedule Friday?" He replied in 4 minutes. "Of course. Is everything okay?" She typed, "Yes, just work stuff." She sent it and looked at the envelope and thought about her mother sitting at the kitchen table in Portland, trying not to cry where the kids could see, and something cracked open in her chest, not all the way, just enough to let the cold in. She did not cry in the hallway. She cried in the shower, briefly, efficiently, the way she did most things that took something out of her. Then she dried off and sat at her kitchen table and started making a list. He didn't hear from her for 3 days. He wasn't alarmed at first. People got busy. He got busy. Sophie had a stomach bug on Saturday that kept them both homebound and exhausted. And by Sunday, he was operating on fractured sleep and an intimate familiarity with the washing machine. But on Monday, when her text said she was fine and she'd reach out soon, and there was a particular quality to the terseness of it, not rude, not cold, but sealed, like a letter that had been carefully glued shut, he recognized something. He had seen that quality before, in people who were managing something they didn't want to ask for help with. He thought about calling. He didn't. Calling felt like pressure, and pressure was the wrong instrument. On Tuesday, he picked Sophie up from school and drove past the flower shop on his way home. He was not intending to stop. He did anyway. Hannah was at the front, trimming stems over the deep stainless sink, and she looked up when the bell above the door rang, and the expression on her face cycled through several things very quickly before it arrived at something that was not quite composed. "Hi," he said. "Hi." She set the stems down. "I know. We were driving by." He looked back through the window at Sophie, who was in the back seat with her face pressed to the glass, watching with unconcealed curiosity. "We were going to get soup. We wanted to see if you wanted to come, but if now is bad." She made a sound that was trying to be a laugh and didn't quite get there. "Hannah." He stepped slightly closer. "What happened?" She looked at the stems on the counter. She looked at the flowers in the buckets along the wall, all that brash, indifferent color. She told him. Concisely, the way she'd learned to speak about financial things, the facts without the shame, as best she could manage, though the shame was always there underneath, a low bass note. He listened. He asked one question. "What do you need right now?" Not, "Let me pay for it." Not, "How much?" Not, "What do you need right now?" She looked at him. Something moved through her that she didn't have a name for yet. "I need to write an email to the property manager that doesn't sound like I'm begging," she said, "and I need someone to sit next to me while I make the phone call because I hate making that kind of phone call." "Okay," he said. "I can do that." He called his neighbor, a retired teacher named Willa, who adored Sophie and was pleased to have her for 2 hours. He came back to the flower shop at closing and sat at the small work table in the back while Hannah wrote the email on her laptop. He read it when she was done and said it was good and meant it. She made the call. He sat beside her. He didn't speak. He handed her a glass of water at one point, silently, and she took it. The property manager agreed to waive the late fee given the documented portal error. She'd need to send the confirmation number from her original payment. She had it. She'd kept everything. When her paycheck arrived on Friday, she paid December's rent in full. She transferred Caleb's supplement. She paid the electric bill. She had done it. All of it. By herself, with someone sitting beside her. She was learning that those two things were not contradictions. She started keeping a toothbrush at his apartment sometime in February, though she couldn't have said the exact day it happened. It felt less like a decision and more like the natural result of enough evenings that ended late and cold outside and warm inside. Sophie, already asleep, the particular stillness of a house after a child has been put to bed. She liked his apartment. It was comfortable in the honest way of a place that had been lived in rather than designed. Sophie's drawings accumulated on the refrigerator until Michael put them in folders by year. The bookshelves were organized by some system she couldn't decode. There was a dent in the kitchen drywall from a shelf that had fallen and been patched but not repainted. She liked Sophie, more than she had expected to, more than she felt she had any right to yet. Sophie was serious and funny in alternation, and she had a habit of asking the kind of direct questions that children ask before they learn that adults consider directness impolite. She had asked Hannah once, very matter-of-factly, if Hannah was going to be her new mom. Hannah had held very still for a moment. "I'm Hannah," she had said. "I'm a person who likes you and your dad a lot, and I'm going to be around. What that means exactly, we'll figure out together. Okay?" Sophie had considered this with the gravity of a small judge. "Okay," she had said. "Can you do French braids?" "I can learn," Hannah had said. But there were harder moments too, and she would have been lying to herself if she hadn't acknowledged them. There was the evening in March when Sophie had a nightmare and called out for her mother, half asleep, her voice high and lost. And Michael had gone to her, and Hannah had stayed in the darkened bedroom listening, and the specific quality of the silence when Sophie's voice stopped had pressed against her chest in a way she couldn't quite define. She was not Claire. She never would be. And she didn't want to be. And she also understood, in a way she hadn't expected to understand this clearly, that the shape of that loss lived in this house, in the way Michael's jaw went tight sometimes without warning, in the anniversary in January that he kept quietly, taking Sophie to the cemetery and then for hot chocolate, just the two of them, and not talking about it much, but telling Hannah clearly, openly, because he believed she deserved to know. She had asked him once, in the spring, whether he thought about Claire when he looked at her. He had taken his time answering. She appreciated that he took his time. "Not in the way you might mean," he said. "Not as a comparison." More like, he had paused. "She's part of why I know what matters. She taught me what I was looking for, even though she's not here." Does that make sense? It did, and it didn't, and she held both things. They were not erasing anything. They were building something beside it, which was different. It was a Saturday in November, and it was raining the way Seattle always rained in November. Which was to say, it misted with patient persistence over everything, and the lights of the city made soft halos in the damp air. Hannah stood outside Orsini's restaurant. She did not stand there for 11 minutes. She stood there for perhaps 30 seconds, just looking at the warm amber glow through the glass, and then she pushed open the door. Michael was already inside. He was at the same table, she thought it was the same table, near the window, and he was not turning his water glass. He was watching the door. She had gotten a full-time position at the dental office in April, a real one with benefits and a salary she could actually build on. The flower shop hours had been good for her in ways she hadn't understood while she was there, but she had been ready to let them go. She had made the decision herself, weighed it carefully, consulted no one until she'd already made up her mind. She had told Michael after, not before, and he had recognized what that meant and had not been offended by it. She sat down. She opened the menu. The numbers were the same, 38 for the pasta, 64 for the steak. Nothing about Orsini's had changed. The sommelier moved between tables with the same practiced ease. The candles were still in the same silver holders. She read the menu with interest rather than dread. She thought she might order the duck. She had never ordered duck in a restaurant. "You look different," Michael said. Different how? He thought about it. He had a way of actually thinking before answering that she had come to trust as one of his more reliable qualities. "Like you know you belong here," he said. She started to deflect. She stopped herself. "Yeah," she said. "I think I do." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and set something on the table. It was a folded piece of paper, slightly crumpled, with the waxy look of something that had been handled many times. She opened it. It was a drawing in crayon. 3 figures stood together in a field of exuberant green, rendered in the confident, anatomically creative style of a 6-year-old. 2 tall ones, 1 small one. Above them, a sun with approximately 14 rays, yellow bleeding into orange at the edges. The 3 figures were holding hands. In Sophie's careful block letters at the bottom. "Our family." Hannah looked at the drawing for a long time. She thought about the woman she'd been 12 months ago, standing outside this same door for 11 minutes, counting the dollars she didn't have. She thought about the orange envelope and the hallway floor and the phone call she'd made with someone sitting beside her. She thought about French braid tutorials watched with a serious 6-year-old on a Sunday afternoon. She folded the drawing carefully and put it in her bag, against her heart. "Tell her I love it," she said. "You can tell her yourself. We're picking her up after." She looked up. "She wanted to come to dinner," Michael said. "I told her this particular dinner was for grown-ups." She accepted this under protest, and in exchange I promised she could choose the dessert place. What did she choose? The one with the waffle fries. That's not a dessert place. She argues otherwise. Hannah laughed. It came out easily, without calculation, which was how she knew it was real. He didn't plan it. That was the truth. And he knew Hannah would know it was the truth, which was part of why it felt right. It was a Sunday morning in December, a year and 3 weeks after their first dinner, and the kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and the slightly burnt edges of the pancakes Sophie insisted on making herself, which always came out slightly burnt because she would not allow intervention. Sophie was in her pajamas, spinning in slow circles in the middle of the kitchen floor while waiting for the next batch, a habit she had when she was content and not aware she was doing it. Michael was at the counter, rinsing the mixing bowl, and Hannah was on the other side of the kitchen island, going through a folder of Sophie's school papers. Because Sophie had asked her to had handed over the folder with the seriousness of a small executive delegating to a trusted deputy. He had the ring in his jacket pocket. He'd had it there for 3 weeks. He'd bought it from a jeweler named Dennis on Capitol Hill who had pale green eyes and a quiet manner, and had asked, without judgment, what kind of person she was. Michael had thought for a moment and then said, "Practical, and careful with things, and braver than she thinks she is." The ring was white gold, simple, a solitaire that wouldn't snag on things or demand attention. He had imagined, vaguely, doing this at a restaurant or overlooking the water or somewhere that could be pointed to later as the place. But Sophie was spinning in the kitchen, and Hannah was reading a drawing Sophie had made of a horse that was more abstract than representational. Her head tilted slightly, smiling, and the morning light came through the window at a low December angle and landed across her hands. He turned off the faucet. He dried his hands. He reached into his jacket. Sophie stopped spinning. Later, much later, Hannah would say that Sophie had known first. That Sophie had gone still a half-second before Michael spoke, like a small instrument tuned to a frequency adults couldn't hear. Michael crossed the kitchen. He didn't kneel, it occurred to him, and then didn't feel necessary. They were past the performance of grand gestures. She had never wanted grand gestures, neither had he. He stood in front of her and held out the ring in his palm and said her name. Hannah. She looked up from the drawing. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. Sophie had stopped spinning and was watching from the middle of the kitchen with her hands clasped in front of her and an expression of barely contained suspense that she was doing her best to make look casual. "I'm not asking because I think you need someone," he said. "I'm asking because I want to be the person next to you, for all of it, whatever it is." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought, briefly, involuntarily, of standing outside Orsini's in the rain with $47, and the particular weight of believing that her value could be measured in what she had or didn't have, could afford or couldn't, was carrying or had put down. She remembered saying, "I can't afford this." She understood, now, that she had been wrong about what she couldn't afford. She had never been able to afford to keep telling herself that love was a transaction she had to balance before she could enter it. That belonging somewhere required first having enough. That warmth was something you earned rather than something you were allowed to receive. Those were the things she hadn't been able to afford. Everything else, it turned out, was manageable. "Yes," she said. Sophie made a sound that was somewhere between a cheer and a shriek, and threw herself between them. And Michael caught her with one arm, and Hannah laughed, and the pancakes, on the griddle, began to smell of burning, and no one moved to save